All right, welcome to our 3 o'clock panel about nonfiction and writing the world today. I'm just going to introduce our esteemed moderator. Amanda Goki covers New Hampshire for the Boston Globe. She focuses on topics including the environment, healthcare, inequity, education, and housing. And she co-writes the Globe New Hampshire Morning Report newsletter, which I assume you all read every day, as I do, but if not, you definitely should. She grew up in Vermont and is a graduate of Harvard University and earned a master's degree from Dartmouth, and she's going to introduce you to today's authors.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks for that introduction, Katie. So I'm joined today by the accomplished authors Rachel Slade and Matt Hungoltz-Hetling for this panel on American nonfiction. So Rachel Slade is the acclaimed author of Into the Raging Sea, which we have a copy of over here. It is a national bestseller, New York Times notable book, and winner of the Maine Literary Award for nonfiction. Rachel spent a decade in the city magazine world at Boston, where she started as a design editor and worked her way up to ultimately become the executive editor. She has won national awards in civic journalism, as well as criticism and reader service. And she has also lectured on political science and journalism at Tufts University. And she splits her time between Brookline, Massachusetts, and Rockport, Maine, which sounds like a dream, so we have to talk after this. And her second book, Making It in America, has also been met with rave reviews, and we're going to be talking about that book a little bit more in depth today. And Matt Hungoltz-Hetling is a critically acclaimed author of A Libertarian Walks Into a Bear, which I see a copy of right here. It's a really fun New Hampshire read, so highly encourage you to read it if you haven't gotten a chance to yet. Matt has been named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, in addition to winning a George Polk Award, and he was also named Journalist of the Year by the Maine Press Association. His writing has also been selected for the Best American Non-Required Reading, and has appeared in the New Republic, USA Today, Popular Science, Atavist Magazine, and elsewhere. He lives in Vermont, in a corner of Vermont that actually happens to be I'm very fond of. And so today we're going to be talking about his second book, If It Sounds Like a Quack, which was published in April of 2023. Matt and Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to set aside some time at the end of the session today for questions from all of you, so please save your questions for the end, and we'll make sure to get to those. So Rachel, I wanted to start with you. Making It in America is the story of American manufacturing, the pressures and policy decisions that have driven it primarily abroad, as well as an urgent call to bring it back to American soil. But you tell it through Ben and Whitney Waxman, this sort of fascinating Maine couple who, against really seemingly all odds, have decided to open their own apparel factory in Portland. They encourage their workers to unionize. They pay them a living wage. They get 3 weeks of vacation and a flexible work schedule. It sounds really great. So tell us about why write a book about manufacturing in the US?
Thank you for that, and thank you for being here on this rainy day. By the way, every time I come to speak anywhere, it rains, so I don't know if it's that I have magical powers, but in any case, thank you for being here. Why talk about manufacturing? Why talk about manufacturing in America? Why should anybody care? When I was little, everything was made in America, right? You're all nodding your heads. Now, about 10% of things that we use are made in America, and when it comes to our clothing, about 99% is made abroad. And for me, that has major resonance. It has had major economic implications for us and cultural implications for us. It's made us very dependent, obviously, on shipping, which was my first book, Into the Raging Sea, which was about an American container ship that went down in the Atlantic in 2015. But it is also about, what happens to us when we lose our tactile connection to the things that we touch and use every single day. I think it also means that we lose opportunities, right? There are a lot of people in our world who probably would be better making things and thinking about making things and thinking about like the actual tactile world. So for all those reasons, I was really focused, or I wanted to understand, like, what happened to us? What happened to America? Why don't we do this anymore? A lot of people told me that simple story, like we all think we know that story, but I really wanted to dig into it. And then I wanted to unpack what it's like when somebody actually tries to revive an industry that for so long has been offshored. So that's a very brief way of introducing my curiosity about this, and then how it, you can imagine, and we'll talk about it, I guess, how it spins out from there in this very complex story, based on one couple, but also exploring our manufacturing history and our political and economic history. So I hope that gives you a little taste.
So you mentioned in the book that Ben and Whitney Waxman were something of a unicorn. So why were they just so hard to find, and how did you decide to anchor this book in their story?
So I've been looking for a company like American Roots for about a decade. As I said, I was driven to find a company that exemplified everything that I felt was important about America. I'm not like a rah-rah flag waving patriot. Well, I guess in the way I am, because my book is Making It America. But it's more that I feel that America, the United States, has been good to so many people and has been a beacon of hope for so many people and represents so many wonderful things that we're losing in this world. And so to bring it back home, I was looking for a company that wasn't sponsored or supported by private equity, that wasn't supported by venture capital. I was looking for Americans, maybe like you and me, people who mortgaged their home, people who cashed in their retirements to start this company because they believed in something. And I also was looking for a company that's absolutely dedicated to making in America for the right reasons, which means independence, right, from foreign influence, locally sourced, so that you're rebuilding something here, these incredible networks that we used to have, but also a company that was founded on the understanding that unionization, organized labor, is critical to rebuilding American manufacturing. Because what does it mean to manufacture in America? Like, why is that important? Besides the idea of being politically independent to a certain extent. Part of it is that we have certain reassurance that workers have been treated well, that the environment has been to a certain extent protected. And so these are the things that this company, Ben and Whitney, held dear, but it's very difficult to find in America because a lot of companies, especially with apparel companies, once they start up, once they get private equity funding, they offshore pretty quickly. We've seen this again and again and again. It's expensive, it's difficult. Manufacturing is messy, it's hard. And it's why the biggest brands and the biggest companies now in America, most of them manufacture overseas or in Mexico or El Salvador. This is tough stuff, right? That's why we gave it up. But it doesn't mean that that's our future. We can rebuild it better. And I felt that Ben and Whitney exemplified that ambition, that young, they're the millennials, that young, kind of idealistic, yet realistic ambition to rebuild something better than it was for all of us.
You had really incredible access to these intimate details of their lives, both personally and professionally. You talk about the sort of on-again, off-again nature of the beginning of their relationship. You talk about Whitney's miscarriages in the book, Ben's history with addiction, and of course, these devastating mistakes and setbacks that happen with the company along the way. Was it hard to convince them to tell you their story and to allow you into their lives in that way?
That's a good question. We're talking about nonfiction today. We're telling people's stories, people who aren't famous. This is not Elon Musk. These are two folks up in Maine trying to make a living. And what's fascinating is that they were very willing to talk to me. Maybe they were naive, but I hope not. There's something about being a writer, I think, up here in New England that's very special. We have this very long tradition of storytelling and of honesty and like facing honesty. I love it in New England. I'm actually from Philadelphia. This is very much my adoptive home. And very much in that spirit, Ben and Whitney embraced me. They welcomed me to come into their workshop, their factory, meet their folks, sit on their board meetings, and they let me into their lives. It's a very special, unusual thing, but I do think that is the American spirit in many ways. There's a trust, right? There's a trust that, that we're all doing this in good faith.
What were the challenges of spending, I think you had mentioned, 3 years reporting this story and being so close to it for that time?
So many challenges. This is a complex story, right? What happened to us, what manufacturing was back in 1790, how we built the American industrial landscape, the one that I was born into in the 60s, how we let it go. So I wanted to weave that story in without being dull, first of all, because, you can read a lot of books about it, a lot about political history, economic history that are kind of snooze fest.
And this book is not that, to be clear.
Thank you.
Very exciting read.
Thank you. No, I was thinking of you, I wanted to write a book that I would want to read that talked about all these pretty weighty issues and a lot of history in a way that was gripping, but that also I could weave through this narrative of two people and all of their employees who are doing this work right now very close to us, while also squeezing in a little bit of a manifesto, right? So it's a complicated book in that respect because there are many different storylines in a way. There's the long storyline of, American manufacturing history, and then there's this kind of compressed storyline, which also includes, by the way, how they dealt with the pandemic, which is a pretty gripping little section of the book, as you can imagine. And then, this kind of larger why this is so important to be thinking about right now. And we can talk about that. I'm happy to talk about that at length. What's happening right now in terms of globalization and how that's affecting all of us. But I think the most difficult thing for me actually was toward the end. Because as we're going to talk about, we're talking about folks, folks who are just doing what they maybe think are the right things, maybe in your case, sometimes maybe not the right things, maybe, but they got scared, that's what happens. And I've seen that. I've been a reporter for a while. I'm a journalist. People get scared. And so I think the hardest part for me was just at the end, just before the book came out, when Ben and Whitney disappeared. They disappeared. And they had a copy of the manuscript. And I thought, this is it. I've poured my heart and my soul into this. It's very lonely. It can be very lonely writing a book. You don't know if anybody's going to give a shit. I'm very passionate about the things that I write about. And then the two people that I cared about most in the world at that moment ghosted me, as the kids said, so that was tough. And I can't blame them. It's scary. It's hard. Book's coming out, and it's about you. And you can't control the message at that point. But I'm happy to say that they're back. They got my back. We're okay now. But that was probably the most challenging moment for me. And as you can imagine, for any writer, that would be pretty scary. But apparently it's not uncommon.
The silence just must be
the
deafening.
Silence, it is.
In that
it's
case.
hard.
Matt, I want to turn to your book. Like your first book, I was happy to see that this one did not hesitate to find a lot of humor in a pretty serious topic, arguably. You trace a handful of characters who believe they have found the one true cure, and it has nothing to do with science. These people have all been sanctioned by the FDA, and several of these
characters intersect later in the book, sort of during the early stages of the pandemic. Donald Trump is president. They find this sort of huge and hugely harmful platform. So how did you decide to write an entire book devoted to quacks?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things, and I should say first, I hate that first moment when I start to talk, because before I start to talk, I might be really smart. It's like, if you've read a book before you crack the book, you're like, oh, this might be the best book ever. And I know probably many of you are writers here today, and before you set that pen to paper or touch that keypad, you think, I'm going to write the best thing ever. So I was this tantalizing blank page until now, and now you have to live with me for the next little bit. So I'm sorry about that. So I think what Rachel and I are both doing is we have this real luxury as authors in this day and age, in that we are given time and energy and the ability to focus on a problem that's facing America, or some facet of this world in which we live, right? And we can really work hard to sort of try to wrestle that thread, some thread from our current situation down to the ground, and then try to understand it, and then try to share an understanding of it in a way that will allow folks to share that understanding, maybe improve the country, maybe improve their lives, maybe just drink more, and so in this case, I was really interested in this idea of medical freedom. I was writing during the pandemic. I thought that there was this really kind of interesting, nuanced debate happening at a very high temperature in our country about where the right of the government to protect the public ends, and where the right of the individual to make a decision for themselves about their own medical care begins. I thought, well, this is fascinating. Sometimes you have to put a mask on and off depending on what county you're crossing the border of, right? So I started calling folks who I thought would have something interesting and nuanced to say about medical freedom. So I started to reach out to folks who had come into some sort of a conflict with the medical establishment, mostly through FDA sanctions. And when I started talking to them, what they told me was not nuanced at all. I would say what if you had a magic wand and you could reform the FDA, what would you do? And they would say, I would abolish the FDA. I would burn the CDC down, right? This was, and so I started to think this isn't really a story about a nuanced political debate or a difference of opinion. This is really a story about a group of people who used to be sort of Joe average, ordinary Americans who have struck upon the same self-discovery, that they think they've come up with a medical revolutionizing idea, which Amanda mentioned I call the one true cure, right? So they all think that they've come up with something that's going to just cure all disease, and that this is going to make the world a much better place. And then they've all started to, and none of them are right. I should preface that. They think maybe the one true cure is handheld lasers. Wave it over your body and it'll cure your brain cancer, or leeches, or the pH miracle guy who believed that all disease was the result of too much acid in the body, so he would prescribe injections of baking soda into the veins, that sort of thing. But they're all fairly sincere in these beliefs because their identities have become so wrapped up in it. But anyway, so these folks, they've all come from a place of being what I would call normal, and been pushed into a place of extremism by their dealings with the establishment. And that Amanda talked about how those things sort of start to intersect a little bit later in the book, and it was really eerie to me to start from people who had nothing in common other than a problem with the medical establishment and find the parallels between their lives. And that gave me insight into the political and structural and systemic problems that are shaping those lives, And it also keyed me into just how much of an influence these folks are having on us. Folks who do not believe that you can cure diabetes with a laser. I was really horrified to find out how much of an impact they had over my healthcare and my healthcare decisions.
What's an example?
I suppose like the biggest one is that there's a man called Jim Humble. He had no scientific training to speak of. He was like an engineer type guy. Went in and out of the Church of Scientology. He was a gold miner. He came to believe that he had developed a fluid, a liquid, that he called the Miracle Mineral Solution or the Miracle Mineral Supplement, MMS, that you could use to drink it and cleanse the body of all disease. So he thought that cancer was caused by parasites, tiny little parasites inside our body. This would kill those parasites. The problem was that this was essentially a diluted form of bleach. And it would kill any parasites inside you, but it would also kill their host organism if you drank enough of it. And it's so crazy that this is the aside, but he also thought he was an immortal alien from the Andromeda galaxy, right?
And it was incredible, Matt, also how you write that into the story, totally taking him at his word that he is an alien.
Yeah. I can't disprove it. And so I give him his rope. So he comes up with this thing, and then he winds up hooking up with this religious guy, but like an anti-establishment religious guy, and the two of them found a church and start to disseminate this product as a holy sacrament of their church. And then they start getting, during the pandemic, when all these quack cures got supercharged by all the energy of people being afraid of COVID and not getting a lot of confidence in the establishment. So they're looking for anything. They're gargling with blood or whatever it is. And so these folks thrived in that environment. They got very celebrated in certain extremist political websites, and were able to back channel some of the MMS to the White House, where there was a guy there, I don't know if you've heard of him, former game show host, tremendous. He wound up coming onto the world stage just a couple of weeks later, not even a couple of weeks, like 10 days later, and made his sort of now infamous comments about perhaps we could cleanse the inside of the body with a disinfectant or bleach. And then, set off a whole shitstorm. And so that was one example. Seeing tens of thousands of poison control center calls happening as a result of the president's comments, and seeing people giving me more pushback over my decision to wear a mask or my decision to get vaccinated, and thereby, endangering my own public safety. That was one good example, Amanda. I think Rachel and I, like, what we do is we try to get this thread that we wrestle, and that's only half of our job. We then have to package it in a way that competes with, your TikTok stream, right? And so we both work overtime to make these narratives really pop and really entertaining. Rachel is no stranger to humor. She has some humor and a lot of pathos and intelligence packed into her writing. I lean more on humor because I don't have those other things. I think that's a little bit of our task as writers, is to give you something that you can actually enjoy and edify yourself with at the same time. And so that's where I land with that.
So I wanted to ask you, there's been so much talk and critique of journalists and media companies for platforming people who spread false information. So I'm really curious how you think about those issues and how you went about handling that in your book.
About the spread of false information?
Yeah, with these exactly like the situation that you were just describing with Donald Trump giving such a huge platform to people who are not spreading information that's based in fact. Obviously, your book is devoted to these cases. So how do you, as a journalist, as someone who feels responsibility for information that's circulating in the world, how do you think about some of those tensions between elevating the messages of some of these people while rooting the scientific backing, what's true, what's false in your narrative?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really touchy subject, I guess, because like, if I just demonize all of these purveyors of death endlessly, then who am I really talking to? I'm talking to people who think that they are purveyors of death, right? I am getting a lot of enthusiastic reinforcement and support from the folks that I'm talking to, but I'm not really changing anyone's mind, because the people who are not in that crowd already are going to immediately like slam the door against me. They lock their mind up, and then I've lost the ability to change. So I think like, to an extent, you have to platform the bad idea in order to debunk the bad idea. And you have to find framings and presentations that allow you to show how silly some of these ideas are.
And you do a lot of that through tone, which is really hard too, and humor, I think.
Yeah, well, they gave me a lot of grist. I say sometimes that like, anytime I'm talking about a person who's generally recognized to be a great person, I try to find something negative to say about them, right? I'm looking for the human flaw because nobody's 100% perfect, and tweaking that image, I think, represents them more authentically and gives me a little more credibility. Similarly, there are no demons roaming the pages of my books, right? These are people. They're deeply, deeply flawed people, but the laser guy, he was a retired dentist. He played a large role in his civic life in a Minnesota community. Is that right, Minnesota? Maybe South Dakota, I don't know. Midwestern community. And he had been a hero at one point. He had like saved his community from a horrific flood.
And that's, I think, where you start actually with
him.
So you trace these sort of journeys of, because that is a question you have, right? When you hear out of context, this person thinks that they're an alien. It's like, okay, like how did you arrive at that conclusion? Like how did you get here? And I think you trace that very dutifully with all these characters.
Yeah, I thought it was important for me to be able to allow people to feel a little bit of a kinship or a little bit of a connection to these people, so that when we see how wrong they go, that we can take that a little bit more seriously. And honestly, like, there's this horrific thing inside all of us, right, where we want to shame and get on a soapbox, right, and just feel good about ourselves by dint of lowering everybody else, right? We do it in the schoolyard. We still do it as adults. We just do it a little more subtly and sometimes with a smile on our face. And I try not to play into that dynamic to an extent. I really, I think there's a humanity there. I like to make fun of the flaws, but with the recognition that I myself am deeply flawed, and I hope that the readers will check their own assumptions as they go along.
You write in your book about some of the structural shortcomings and failures of modern medicine, that it can be expensive, out of reach, there's not enough doctors, and you talk about the reasons why, intentional reasons behind that, and how this really creates an environment where quacks can thrive. And I think, right, there's also just people want to have a feeling that they can get better, and sometimes medicine does not have a good or easy answer for that. I'm curious, what's your take on why quacks have been so successful? Do you see this as more of a structural problem?
Yeah, I was about halfway through the book, and I thought to myself, like, am I defending Big Pharma? What is wrong with me? What I've come to understand is that we have such a deeply flawed medical system in our country, right? There are political considerations, there are profit motives, there are poor training programs and overtraining programs. In the 1800s, the American Medical Association embarked upon a campaign to make fewer doctors available in the country so that they would command a higher wage. This has been the most successful campaign of professional elevation in history, right? And so they've kept that up for the last 150 years. As a result, we now have fewer doctors per capita in Mississippi than there are in Kazakhstan, right? That's a problem for the wealthiest nation in the world, right? And it's also created this sort of cultural barrier between the doctor and the patient, right? They are elites. They're godlike. Yeah, we every once in a while, one of them shows their obsessive overlord tendencies and like carves their names on a patient's stomach mid-surgery or something, and then we all learn about it and shame on that person. So I think like we have a terrible system that's not transparent, that is structurally flawed. It doesn't have full transparency. It costs too much, and there's not enough accountability. But when you're going with one of these one true cure quacks, what you're choosing is a system that has zero transparency, that has zero accountability, that also has that same profit motive driving it. And so I get why people are disgusted with the system, but I urge them to, and you ask kind of like what causes these quacks to thrive. It's fear, right? Rachel was talking about fear. It's the same thing. You know, we're afraid that our doctors aren't well equipped enough, even though they've been remarkably successful on average at extending our lives and curing diseases and all these things. But even though we're afraid, we can't just reject the establishment and science-based and evidence-based solutions out of hand. You know, if you want to see your chiropractor or do some deep breathing, take a more meditative approach to some of your health problems, I am so supportive of that. But the red flag is when you have the alternative practitioner who says that they can cure everything, and when you have a lack of scientific evidence to back it. So if you have an alternative practitioner who's telling you, hey, don't see your regular doctor. They will kill you. They will poison you. That's a red flag. And so I just urge people to go with the system that is demonstrated to have some efficacy rather than the person who says, I'm going to promise you the world, and I have some personal anecdotes that will support that. That doesn't mean anything. You know, I have some stuff to sell you as well, like my book.
Rachel, I wanted to turn back to you with a practical question. You know, we know greenwashing is an issue. How do you sort through manufacturing fact versus fiction when you're going to buy clothes or other products?
Yeah, no, this is really hard. So I'm actually going to use your question to introduce a concept that maybe a lot of people don't know about, and it's really important in our ecosystem right now. So did you ever wonder why a hoodie bought online, made in China, is like $25? You ever wonder about that, or you're just like, damn, look, it's cheap? There are so many things. There's so many costs baked into that thing that are latent, right? That we're going to be paying down the line. Not now. You get that $25 hoodie, that's great. You're saving money. But the truth is that there are so many latent costs. So there are obviously labor costs to that. There are undoubtedly people being exploited. You can't make a product that cheap without people being exploited. There are also the environmental costs. There are 3 rivers in Bangladesh now that are technically dead, because the apparel industry, which Bangladesh basically took over, or that became a large part of their economy, the apparel industry and the textile industry, the dyes can be so toxic that that many countries are now basically destroying themselves to provide us with cheap goods. So when I go shopping, I do my best to find made in USA stuff, because as one manufacturer actually said to me, this is actually interesting. I've started connecting to a lot of people who are committed to making stuff here, and it's hard. Trust me, it's hard. You could even write a book about it, which I did. Thank you. And so I've started to ask these people who are so committed to it and who are making so many sacrifices to not only making things in America, but like sourcing in America, which is so critical. Like, it's a very important part of this whole thing, because you need to build a whole supply chain locally. We know what it looks like when you don't. In fact, the US military is very concerned now that our supply chain is so strained and so dependent on foreign sourcing that we are actually at a national security risk moment. I mean, I hope I'm making it clear, like, we're in trouble. Also, 90% or more of generic medicines are made in China and India right now. Our generic, it's very, very difficult to monitor. Katherine Howe actually wrote a book about this, about some of the horrific conditions under which our medicines are being made in foreign countries and how difficult it is to, regulate. Anyway, so what I've found is that there are good people making here. And so I ask them when they reach out to me and they say, thanks for writing this book. Like, I feel seen. I say, one of the things I ask them is, so why is Made in USA important to you? And what's really interesting is that a lot of people can't answer that. So these are the people who are doing it. And they can't give me a good answer. But I did get one. I got one. He was a guy who had actually worked for companies that had manufactured abroad. And now he has his own brand that's manufactured in LA, which, by the way, is a huge manufacturing town. If you do find things made in USA, especially apparel, it's probably made in LA. But anyway, he said to me, it takes tremendous resources to manufacture ethically and environmentally. It just does. I've seen it because I've manufactured abroad. I've manufactured in all sorts of places. And I cannot trust anything unless it's made here. It's the only place that I feel, and I suppose there's some other countries too, but for the most part, it's the only place that I feel that what I have bought has not done irreparable damage. And so that's what I think when I buy Made in USA. I think about the people I'm supporting. They're the people who support me. In my country, we all pay taxes. So when you buy something made by Americans, you're buying something made by people who are paying into the taxes that build roads and bridges, hopefully bridges that actually don't collapse when ships hit them. But roads and bridges and all kinds of things that I depend on, that my children depend on, that my parents depend on. Like, that's society. This is our community. Like, this is our larger community. When you buy something, for example, made in China, which is very, very cheap, deliberately so, because a lot of it is being actually subsidized by the Chinese government. Their shipping is being subsidized. Their industry is being subsidized, right? So everything is being subsidized in great part to ensure that we stop producing, right? There is a built-in intention to create dependency so that we lose our, not us specifically, but globally, so that people become more and more dependent on Chinese goods, so that we lose the capability to make things for ourselves. And then things will inevitably get more expensive once there's this, we've lost our capability. So, sorry, I'm a little bit preachy, but anyway, and I apologize for that. But I don't think we think about this enough, right? We thought about it maybe a little bit during the pandemic when we saw like empty shelves and we saw nurses wearing trash bags. But I want to remind us that like this problem has not gone away. So anyway, that's a long way of saying I have found a lot of Made in USA companies that are really great. and they're doing it for the right reasons, you will probably fall in love with many of these people. It will make you feel good to meet them. It certainly did for me. I have a list on my website. If you go to my website, which is rachelslade.net, you can see Made in USA brands. And I've been crowdsourcing it. So if you know Made in USA brands, just reach out to me, people who you think are great. And yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of greenwashing, and what you need to watch out for most of all is that private equity, when it does buy up these brands, the first thing it says is offshore. Why are you spending so much on labor? You can do it cheaper abroad. And so that's why I want these companies and us to understand, what is the value of Made in USA? What does that actually mean to us? Why is it important? And once we get that, and I hope you get a little bit of that from my book, and I hope you get a little bit of that just from, poking around on some of the websites of the people who are making the things here. But once I think we start to internalize that, it's going to get a little easier for us to embrace this concept, right? Of supporting each other, of making sure our dollars stay where they will support us, of building capability in our own country to make all kinds of things, of giving our children maybe more options, right? So instead of going into the knowledge economy or the service economy, there are other things that they can do, like actually create and build things and be part of this new revolution, innovate by making, which is how we always innovate. Are there any makers here, by the way? I'm just curious. No makers? Yes, a maker, one maker.
You want to move to question?
Makers. Excellent, thank you. I started out as an architect. I can tell you that the only way to innovate is to make, because a lot of innovation comes from accidents, mistakes. But you're watching, you're paying attention. Something weird went wrong. What does that mean? That becomes an opportunity, that becomes innovation. So making is also so critical just to our ability to keep moving forward, to keep getting better, to strengthen our economy and each other.
I want to open it up now for questions from the audience, so please raise your hands. Great.
Our maker supporter.
This is so important to me, and I feel like I was supposed to be here. I work in retail for over 30 years, and I finally am at a point in my career where I got to have a weekend off. So I am so glad to be here.
Well, welcome.
But one
So
of the
glad you
things, I
came.
just want to make a comment, Rachel. I work for an independently owned home furnishings company, and a majority of our manufacturers are not only US made, but New England made. And people are starting to come back to that and realize it. And we also work with upholstery companies that are US and employee owned. So it is starting to come back, and we're realizing it.
Oh, thank you for that. I love the employee owned too. Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? We have time for maybe
looks
one
like
more.
We have one down here in the front.
On a lighter note, this is for Matt. I was kind of wondering what kind of reaction the characters in your book have had to being published.
I asked him that too.
Yeah, it runs the gamut, I suppose, is the short answer. Rachel and I were talking about that moment of like tension and nervousness and terror that we feel. Some journalists just kind of like bull through it. It's almost like they revel in the antagonism of it all. But that is not me. I am lying awake at night wondering how they're going to react. And some of them don't like it at all. Some of them wind up happy. And sometimes I'm surprised about who that is. Sometimes the person that I think I've bent over backwards to portray in a nice way will tell me that, oh, I wish you hadn't mentioned my sister's name. And other people that I've been, fairly critical of, that's mostly a negative portrait, have said, yeah, I don't read anything that's written about me. Or no, they say that they felt like it was fair, or they'll focus on a more positive element. So thank you for that. Did I know some people come in? Were you coming in from the one downstairs? Did that session just end?
Upstairs, yeah.
Or upstairs.
It's okay.
Okay, all right. I was just curious. All right.
Maybe one more? Okay.
Thank you both. This is really interesting. Question for Matt. Could you discern anything, a common thread amongst your subjects, if you will, as to whether that was more personal, that they went to the dark side, or was it some encounter with the FDA or the pharmaceutical industry? What did you glean about, the origins for their passage to the dark side?
Sure, that's a great question. They all started in a place of, I think, earnestness. I really think I've discovered this thing. I'm looking through a telescope and I see or a microscope rather, and I see something that I think disproves germ theory, right? The acid guy, the baking soda injection guy, he actually thinks germ theory is a half-baked idea. And he goes with something called the terrain theory. But that's his honest belief, right? And everyone that I spoke with, as far as I could tell, they were absolutely sincere. And so the commonality is that, one, they wed their personalities to this idea. We all like to sort of inflate our own sense of self-worth a little bit. That was why I asked them to raise the stage so high. So we all like to be elevated a little bit in our own minds. And these folks think that they've struck on something that's going to put them down in history, as someone who just totally obviated the need for all the big pharma and medical devices that we live with because we have to. And so they start to think of themselves as a sort of savior, right? And when they come into contact with the medical establishment, some of them are expecting the red carpets to be rolled out for them. And I think they collide with the culture of the establishment. They collide with that breed of elitism that I was talking about before among medical professionals. And certainly, I'm married to a medical professional. Certainly, many of them are lovely people. My wife's friends, and I know there are a lot of people who get into that for the right reasons, and so I really don't want to denigrate those folks. But the overall culture is one of building a wall of I have knowledge and you, the public, cannot understand it, and that is an inherently antagonistic stance that radicalizes the folks who think that they've come up on a good idea. And that's a very difficult problem to solve. You have to backtrack it to some form of more science literacy earlier in life, so that, and also a more glad-handed examination of these radical ideas that they're coming up with. And then once they got rejected and hurt by the medical establishment, they became winnable from a political standpoint from the far right, because the far right was saying, hey, why are you bashing your head against the wall trying to convince people that leeches can cure kidney disease? It's not about whether or not leeches are effective. It's about whether or not your patients have the right to choose you. It's a medical freedom issue. It's not a science issue. It's a political issue. And they're very susceptible to that. That is a very seductive message if you've been bashing yourself up against the medical establishment. And so they became radicalized and then politicized and embraced, particularly at the time of the pandemic when medical freedom became a real rallying call for a lot of folks, and sort of like the libertarian and more mainstream establishment Republicans kind of blended over that issue of medical freedom. And so it's a long-winded answer, but those are some of the commonalities that I experienced.
Thank you so much. I think we can stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.